in the hands of a mastermind of terror.
I want to play a game with Lieutenant McClane.
What kind of game?
Simon Says.
The path to revenge leads straight to John McClane.
John McClane, NYPD. Are you all right?
Yes. Laundry day.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Podcast Part 3, the Part 3 podcast. I am Sam.
And I am Will.
We're actually in the same room today, so if the audio quality is better and or worse, that's why. It's a very guerrilla punk rock setup right now because I only have like 2 mics and 1 mic stand available, and it's I found a TV table we could use. It's great. It's great. We're right back to our student filmmaking days.
That's right. Sitting on books, everything's teetering on each other. It's going to crash any moment.
Yeah.
But we're all good.
Pretty much. And so it was my pick this week, and I went with, we're going back to 1995 again, another 1995 blockbuster, another 1995 threequel. It is Die Hard with a Vengeance. The third in the, I think, 5-movie Die Hard franchise that extended over 4 decades, I think.
Yeah. Wow. That's right. Yeah. The 80s, 90s, 2000 to mid-2000s, and then
I think
2012 or 13.
Sure, yeah. Let's go with that. This is an interesting movie because it's a few years later than the first 2 Die Hards. Like Die Hard 1 and 2,
they were like within 2 years of each other, weren't they?
yeah, they like Fox and Joel Silver got Die Hard 2, Die Harder. I think they got that one out pretty quickly. And then this had a long development road, and that included many, many scripts. And along the way, like Bruce Willis and Joel Silver had a huge falling out, and so Joel Silver wasn't involved anymore. And I think that tied into the Last Boy Scout. Bruce Willis didn't have a great time on The Last Boy Scout. But yeah, this is the franchise that sort of solidified Bruce Willis as an action icon. And the original Die Hard is John McTiernan. It's like, is it the most famous action movie ever? It's certainly
up there. And I mean, I think it's pretty close to a perfect movie.
It is as close to a perfect action movie as you can get. The premise is so simple. The lead character is just like the perfect casting,
and the structure of that movie is just, it's tight like a drum. It is so like just classically constructed with great setups and payoffs, and it's easy to follow. There's a great emotional I mean, there's what more is there to say about Die Hard at this point?
Yeah, I know. It's John McTiernan, who was right at that point. He did Predator, Die Hard, and The Hunt for Red October in a row, and those are like 3 of my favorite action movies.
Yeah.
And they're all pretty damn flawless. Super quotable, and it's super fun. Everything about it is just an absolute delight, and it really didn't need to be a franchise.
No, I mean, because at the end of the day, what more? It's almost like the Death Wish sequels, right? Where it's just sort of like, well, it's kind of unfortunate that this is happening to this person over and over again. Like, he just becomes unlucky as a character. It's not like at the end of Die Hard there are questions that need answering. It's not like, because, he gets back together with his wife and they go off into the sunset, and you kind of don't need anything more.
Yeah, pretty much. And then he does it all again a couple years later at an airport.
And it just starts becoming like a Bond movie. Like,
it became the cliche for action movies that they were Die Hard in a place. Die Hard 2 is Die Hard in an airport. And then there's, Speed is Die Hard on a bus. And Speed 2 is Die Hard on a cruise ship, which we'll get to in a minute. And then it finally came full circle when they made the movie Skyscraper, and they unironically said it's Die Hard in a skyscraper.
Right.
And people were like, who wants to tell them?
Yeah, it's it's so many action movies that inspired. And I also think the character of John McClane, sort of his DNA kind of filtered through, because he wasn't like a Schwarzenegger or a Stallone type. He's muscular. He's like, but he's not
invincible.
He's not
That's
invincible.
like part of his appeal as he is going to take a massive beating throughout the movie.
Right, but also on an emotional level, Bruce Willis brings something that those other guys kind of didn't. I mean, in some of their roles they did, but for the most part, Bruce Willis is sort of like this raw nerve a little bit. Like his emotions are more present, and than the action heroes of the time were a lot more stoic.
Yeah, he's much more relatable, certainly in this era of his movies, because he's not like a huge brick of meat, and he's a pretty good actor.
Yeah.
And he's the character of John McClane does not seek out action. He does not want to. He spends the first act of Die Hard just trying to get out of the building.
Right.
And, he's kind of a schlubby dude, and he's got a receding hairline. He looks a lot more like one of the Ghostbusters than he does like Rambo.
Yeah. And he's trying to make it work with his wife, who they're really on the outs, and there's a big friction in their marriage, and that makes him just more of an ordinary guy and makes him, relatable in that way. It's one of the best character introductions, I think, of a movie is the introduction of John McClane on that plane. You get everything about him within 3 seconds.
Yeah. It's the original Die Hard is an absolute classic. Yeah. I love it. You love it. We all love it. Die Hard 2's fine. Of the sequels, it feels the most like the original, and I think that's deliberate. It doesn't have John McTiernan. I think it was Rennie Harlin directed it. Yeah. It was his first movie after Nightmare on Elm Street 4. The villains aren't as memorable.
Right. It's William Sadler, right?
It's William Sadler and Franco Nero.
Right.
And I think John Amos is it turns out he's a bad guy.
Yeah, I've only seen it once, I think, and I don't remember anything about it. I just remember William Atherton being there randomly again.
He's on the plane with Holly. Yeah. It's got a lot of hey, that guy, Robert Patrick 1 year before Terminator 2. Cole Meany shows up.
Right.
Dennis Franz is in it as the airport cop, which he's kind of the best part of the movie.
Yeah, and they insert Al Powell in again, don't they?
He gets the briefest cameo.
Yeah.
And
it also feels like it's one of those 90s action movies that also feels over directed. There's just so much going on.
Yeah, it's Rennie Harlin kind of, you get the sense that he was trying to prove I'm comparing Rennie Harlin on Die Hard 2 to Steven Spielberg and Raiders of the Lost Ark, trying to prove something. Yeah. And I think his next movie after that was Cliffhanger, which I would say is peak Rennie Harlin.
Right. And that's Die Hard on a cliff.
That's Die Hard on a cliff. Yeah, it's Die Hard on a mountain. Which brings me back around to the development of Die Hard with a Vengeance, or just Die Hard 3. So I think Die Hard 2 came out in 91, I want to say, 90, 91.
Sounds right.
In 92, 93, Joel Silver was working really hard. He really wanted to make Die Hard 3, Die Hard on a cruise ship. So he enlisted initially, and this is the first of 5 different screenplays that happened in conjunction with the development of Die Hard with a Vengeance. He enlisted W. Peter Iliff, who had just come off of Point Break. And so he had a big hit with Point Break. He was like, will you do Die Hard on a cruise ship? So he starts writing that. I think Peter Iliff worked on that for a period. And then they discovered at the same time a similar script had just gone into production at Warner Brothers called Dreadnought, starring Steven Seagal.
Oh.
Which eventually became Under Siege, which is Die Hard on a battleship. And initially, the script for Dreadnought had been pitched to Joel Silver as a potential Die Hard 3, and he turned it down. And then they also bought another script called Supertanker just to shelve it so no one would make it and interfere with their Die Hard 3. So, Die Hard on a cruise ship didn't work out. And then in the time between, let's say, 1992 and 1995... they had 3 different writers work on 3 different Die Hard scripts. Those writers were John Fasano, who was a script doctor. He, I think he did was one of the writers on Tombstone.
Okay.
Doug Richardson, who had written Die Hard 2, and John Milius.
Whoa.
John Milius, for those of you that don't know him, is the person that they based Walter from The Big Lebowski on.
And made Conan the Barbarian, the original with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Red Dawn.
Yeah, he also wrote the script for Apocalypse Now.
Legendary crazy person.
Yeah, and I think he's one of the writers that may have done a pass on the USS Indianapolis monologue in Jaws.
Right.
I think he did a pass.
Yeah, I think he's credited with the one who actually wrote.
Yeah, and I think Robert Shaw made a few changes. Like Carl Gottlieb, of course, wrote the original script. Jaws, great movie.
I want to know what John Milius's Die Hard 3 was.
He wrote the first of the three, and it was going to take place in a jungle. And when that one was rejected, they went to Doug Richardson, and that was Die Hard on the subway, the LA subway taken over by terrorists. Okay. And then finally, John Fasano's script was terrorists kidnap John McClane's daughter, and he has to run all over New York or LA. I don't think they ever landed on it, trying to get it back. And that sort of put them on the path to Die Hard with a vengeance. Now, none of those scripts worked out, though I think the Die Hard in a Jungle story led to development on Die Hard 4, which then tied into the movie Tears of the Sun.
Oh my god.
It's so complicated. Because a lot of people think Tears of the Sun was originally written as a Die Hard 4 script, but it's just that he liked the title Tears of the Sun so much that he lifted it from a Die Hard 4 script and used it for that movie. And then Die Hard 4 became Die Hard 4.0, which became Live Free or Die Hard, and was the cyber terrorism.
Oh my god.
Yeah. This is like a little peek into like how, like if you've ever read one of those like the greatest movies never made type of books, just the sheer volume of scripts that get written and then optioned and then never made into anything, and the number of scripts that get pitched for like sequels to things
That never get made.
And this is an era, I think, of the we're going to option a screenplay and turn it into a sequel for something that already exists. And this is kind of like one of the most famous examples of that.
Well, so I'm sure you're going to get to this, but Die Hard is based on a novel,
Yes.
right? And then Die Hard 2 is also based on a novel, but a different novel.
Yes. Die Hard 1 is based on Nothing Lasts Forever by Roderick Thorpe. And the character in that is not named John McClane. It's something close to it. And Frank Sinatra had played that character in a different movie years prior. So when they made Die Hard, I think contractually they had to offer the part to Sinatra in 1988, which is hilarious. And then Die Hard 2 is based on someone else, not Roderick Thorpe, not that character, that they then repurposed into Die Hard 2.
What a weird franchise. And Die Hard 4 is loosely based on like a Newsweek article or something like that.
Yeah, like an article in Wired about cyber terrorism and the concept of like the fire sale where hackers could take down the American infrastructure. But ultimately, the script they ended up using for Die Hard with a Vengeance was written by Jonathan Hensley. He had written a script called Simon Says, which was originally intended to be Brandon Lee's project after The Crow. And Brandon Lee tragically died during the production of The Crow. And so I think all the Simon Says running around New York, wanting revenge on the cop character is from the Simon Says script. And then I think they worked in the bank, the gold heist in that.
Right. Because, it just seems like they just wanted to ape the original movie where the terrorists are actually, their goal is something different than what they initially said.
Yeah. The only difference is here, it is so weirdly structured, and you can see all the seams in where this was like one script. It's like the first act of this movie is one movie. The middle act is another movie. And then the third act
is a completely different movie.
Is kind of just like 4 short films.
Yeah. Yeah.
33 short films about John McClane.
Yeah.
This is when Die Hard stopped being Die Hard this is Die Hard in a city and
Metropolitan
county
city.
of New York, And it's from that little, 9 or 10 year period between the 2 World Trade Center attacks where terrorism in New York was a thing, but it wasn't a horrible enough thing that we couldn't joke about it.
Yeah. Yeah, there were moments watching this where I was like, I don't know, this makes me feel kind of uncomfortable when all the New York buildings were exploding and everyone was running away from them. I was like, oh boy.
Yeah, so basically the movie starts with bomb goes off, and the movie starts with Summer in the City by the Lovin' Spoonful. Yeah. Just the title slams in and you're there. I'm in for you're okay, you've bought me 10 minutes movie.
Yeah, that's what I said. Hot Town and I'm in.
But basically, terrorist blows up a department store in Manhattan, and says, "Get me John McClane. John McClane will do what I say, or I will blow up another building." John McClane, in the time between Die Hard 2 and this, has
separated from his wife again.
He's gone full nostalgia movie character arc, where now he's like a burnout drunk. He's a mess in this movie. Like,
He's
they
a
first find him, he is
disaster.
just like, he's got like a massive hangover. He looks like shit. You know?
It actually sort of highlights something that Bruce Willis is really good at playing, is just existentially exhausted.
Yeah.
Like, he can play depression so well. Like, you think about this and The Sixth Sense and Unbreakable, like, he just plays, like, it looks like his soul has
Like
rotted.
fundamentally broken
Yeah.
characters. Yeah, which is, you know, it's kind of a bummer to see John McClane like that.
Right. But it is, like, as, like, just Willis's acting prowess. Like, it's just, he's really good at that.
Yeah.
You know?
It's like the first two Die Hards, you know, he starts the movie, he's very clean cut, he's going to a Christmas party, he's going to pick up his wife at the airport, and then by the end he's down to his, you know, tank top, and he's covered in bullet wounds,
and he's barefoot, too.
He's barefoot, and he's just like, hands! In this one, he's like that at about the 25-minute mark. And
Yeah.
he's kind of, he shows up at full John McClane, but if his nemesis was alcoholism.
Yeah.
And then his first task is to go up to Harlem and wear a sandwich board in his underwear that says, well, let's just say in the TV edit, it's been superimposed to say, "I hate everyone." And that brings in his sidekick for the movie.
Which is Samuel L. Jackson.
Yeah.
And I mean, Samuel L. Jackson and Bruce Willis are great together. I mean, they have, like, the best chemistry.
Yeah, and this is coming right off of Pulp Fiction.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're not really on screen together in Pulp Fiction, but, like, they're, like, Samuel L. Jackson is, I think he got an Oscar nomination for Pulp Fiction. He is now a full-on, he done Jurassic Park and then Pulp Fiction, and then he did this, and he's a full-on movie star now.
And and it's Samuel L. Jackson. I mean, what else is there to say? He's great. I
Well,
mean,
and I think his performance really helps this movie, because there are moments, kind of especially in, like, the third act where he's on the boat, where you get the sense that the character was maybe written to be more of comic relief. Like, I could easily see this character becoming like Chris Tucker in The Fifth Element, and just being, like, really scared and panicky and annoying. But he's Samuel L. Jackson, you know, he doesn't play that kind of part,
No.
and he bounces off of Bruce Willis really well.
yeah, and it's like he can match Bruce Willis, and it's not the Fifth Element dynamic where it's just sort of someone, like, screaming and shouting and trying
Yeah,
to
he's
be
not
funny.
he's not Leo Getz.
Yeah.
He's not, which incidentally the Simon Says script was also pitched to be a Lethal Weapon 4.
Of course it was. Wait, so Joel Silver was a producer on all of these movies, on Die Hard and on on Lethal Weapon.
Joel
Wow,
Silver-
that just occurred to me. I
Yeah,
never
Joel
really
Silver
put that
is
together.
like kind of that the late 80s, early 90s Michael Kamen scored you know, cop on the edge action movie is all Joel Silver.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That hadn't
And
occurred to
he
me.
wasn't involved in this one, and that's why I think this one feels and looks so different than those first two.
Yeah, his hand is not. I hadn't really. I didn't know that when I sat down to watch this. His hand is definitely not felt.
No,
you know?
no. This doesn't feel. I would say this is, again, it's the best of the sequels. It's the best looking of the sequels, but it doesn't feel like a Die Hard in a lot of ways, and I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, like, the first act of the movie is he's got to run around and, like, do, like, answer riddles and to stop bombs from blowing up. It's very The Batman,
Yeah.
honestly. It's and he's bickering with Samuel L. Jackson, and then at, like, the 45-minute mark, we don't see Jeremy Irons, the villain, until the 45-minute mark. And that's when they blow up the bomb at the Wall Street station, and the villains finally appear. Just a massive influx inside of 2 minutes of just villains and goons and henchmen. They all just come rolling in out of nowhere.
Yeah, and they're trying to give them sort of like the Star Wars. Well, actually, the original Die Hard's like this too, where everyone has their thing, and they, like, show up, and you're like, oh, I know what this guy's deal is.
Yeah, well, there's, like, he's got Targo, who's, like, his right-hand man, but also he's like the heavy. Bruce Willis always has to fight someone and get
Right.
the snot kicked out of him. And so that's Targo. And then there's the blonde gal who doesn't speak, and she has the throat scars, and
Right.
she's like the crazy one.
Yeah.
And then there's just like an endless parade of like goons
Just goons and thugs.
that
Lots
are
of
either
goons
have
and
or
thugs.
American actors doing good American accents, or they're like British actors doing awful American accents. Jeremy Irons' American accent that he throws on in
Is
this,
so weird.
it's like a southern accent, but it's also he sounds like Jesse Ventura. It's this is Wall Street. A lot of money making here. Yeah, I don't know. It's such a fun movie, but it is such a mess of a movie too.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of all over the place, and I think the problem with it is, as a Die Hard movie, is, I mean, whatever that means, is that there's no like, there's like talk and like motions of him trying to get back together with Holly, but she's not a presence in the movie.
No,
And
I
so-
think they needed to do like one more rewrite, because
Yeah.
I was thinking about it while I was watching it, because I was like, what is a Die Hard movie? Like, yeah, Die Hard is someone's trapped in a place, a hero trapped in a place with people that have taken it over. There's certain elements of the first Die Hard and the second one that I think of as being John McClane has allies.
Right.
He has Al, but he also has like a funny ally. Like in the second movie, he's got like that guy that has like the jazz records in the basement of the airport.
Oh, right.
In the
right.
first one, he's got Argyle. All the humor in the first two comes out of like authority figures.
Right.
Like the stupid media, the stupid cops, the stupid feds.
Right. And like,
The stupid Ellis, the stupid corporate guys. And the humor in this one comes,
it's all banter, really.
and it's all New York humor.
Right.
You know, like, there's a bomb. Welcome to New York.
yeah.
If the 80s were a little bit more like anti-establishment, like all the cop, the rogue cop is the cop he's the cop on the edge. He's the true hero. The ones down on the ground don't know what's going on. This is Giuliani's New York. The cops are the heroes. We have like 5 or 6 other cops that are pretty big characters in this.
And they're not like, they're not inept. They're all pretty like
No,
good. at,
they're
like,
they're
their
very
jobs.
heroic. Like I was thinking, like the Charlie the Bomb guy feels the most like a Die Hard like sidekick character.
Yeah.
But then like you've got the like John McClane's boss Cobb. You've got Graham Greene from
Yeah, right.
Dances with Wolves. You've got the blonde gal with the really thick New York accent.
Right. And then there's a couple other folks who are sort of orbiting them.
Yeah, there's the Walsh is the one that always played his lottery ticket badge number is his
Right,
lottery
right,
ticket,
right,
and then he
right.
gets murdered
And then there's also like random New Yorkers who like the switchboard people, like the police switchboard folks. Like that's
all the NYPD communications are gonna go through this switchboard, and I'm gonna marry Donald Trump. Back in 1995, where Donald Trump was just like, oh, he's a really rich guy. That's all he was.
a really rich guy who was in the tabloids a lot.
And he was like the epitome of rich because all his shit was gold.
Yep.
But yeah, it doesn't feel like 80s New York.
No.
Like 70s and 80s seedy, graffiti covered, the Warriors New York. This is a very clean cut. It's like hustle and bustle New York. Everyone's like, I gotta get a cab. I gotta get to my job on Wall Street, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, the only thing about this New York that feels remotely resonant or prescient is Samuel L. Jackson's very sound reasoning for not wanting John McClane to get killed by those gang members in the opening when he's got the racist sandwich board. Because he basically says, I didn't want a white cop to get killed in Harlem because then we got 1,000 white cops up there with itchy trigger fingers. And I'm like, yeah, that tracks. I think
That hasn't changed.
that's not an unreasonable stance. Like the whole like Bruce Willis accusing Samuel L. Jackson of being racist against white people thing, just
yeah, that's
it's so weird.
Really weird.
They thankfully like kind of like thankfully they never make it seem like Samuel L. Jackson is in the wrong, because usually he ends up being like, I don't like you. It's like Bruce Willis, you don't like me because I'm white, and he's like, I don't like you because you're gonna get me killed.
Right, yeah, and I think with any other actor, I think because Samuel L. Jackson can give what he gets, you know what I mean? Like,
exactly,
he
and
can
I think
sort of
that's
give
what
it back.
makes that character work, is that he never feels cowardly or are stupid or subordinate to
Right.
John McClane.
He's right up there with him and meets him head to head. And
Yeah.
I think with any other actor, not that they couldn't do it well, but I think Samuel L. Jackson will call, like, you buy it when Samuel L. Jackson calls Bruce Willis out on it.
Yeah, and I think he's also like, call your wife.
Yeah.
You had a fight with her and you haven't talked to her for a
Just
year.
call her. What's
your
wrong
wife,
with
man.
you, dude?
Yeah, the plot of this movie just goes all over the place because it's like basically once they steal all the gold from the Federal Reserve.
Right, then they have to move it somewhere.
Well, it's like Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson, John McClane and Zeus Carver spend the whole rest of the movie chasing down the trucks and then the boat to find Simon, to find Jeremy Irons, so that he'll give him the like deactivation code for this bomb that's hidden in a school in New York.
Right, and then that ultimately becomes a red herring.
Yeah, but they spend a long time with all the other cops evacuating the school,
Right.
rescuing these kids that are trapped in the school.
And a lot of that stuff just kind of felt endless.
Like, I always zone out right at the halfway point when they go into the aqueduct.
Yeah.
Like, every time I watch this movie, I'm kind of like, oh, and it like suddenly like I didn't like then I realized, oh, like they went like way upstate.
Yeah.
Like suddenly they're in like the countryside and it's raining.
Right,
And I guess they went up to like a dam.
Yeah, that was sort of the moment. Like, I had a lot of fun with this movie, but that was where the movie kind of lost me. And especially when Bruce Willis got shot out of the thing.
Yeah.
When John McClane got shot out of the pipe and Samuel L. Jackson just happened to be there to pick him up. I was like, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm over this.
Yeah, it's because also that's the point where like it's so hard to put my finger on it, but it is like, yeah, because they tried to wedge the angle of, oh, they're not really terrorists, they want to steal all this gold, and John McClane's only involved because like it's like, oh, it's a happy accident that you killed my brother, but it has nothing to do with my plot.
With why I'm doing this. Yeah, and it's like yeah, it's like they couldn't decide which way to go and kind of went in the middle. It's like either the villain wants revenge or the villain wants money. And they were like, well, he can want both. And it doesn't really quite land.
Yeah,
It didn't
whereas
land
it's
for me.
much clean. Well, also, it's not a big reveal in the first Die Hard. Like, like, what kind of terrorists are you? Whoever said we were terrorists?
Right, and and or when he says like the shining light or whatever terrorist thing, he says, I heard about it on 60 Minutes or whatever.
And in this one, they leave it more ambiguous, but they don't commit enough to him feeling like he's some sort of revolutionary that is going to destroy. Is this going to be? Is this a Die Hard or a Goldfinger?
Right,
Where,
exactly.
Goldfinger wants to destroy all the gold to create economic chaos and raise the value of his gold.
Right.
Because James Bond laid out that it would be physically impossible in one day to haul all the gold out of Fort Knox, yet they seem to do it in the Federal Reserve, no problem.
Yeah, and and then like as the set pieces sort of got bigger and weirder and like
and the effects got worse.
The effects got and the effects got worse. I was like, this feels like a later day Bond, like a late 90s Bond movie.
It becomes at some point it becomes like a Brosnan era Bond movie.
Yeah.
The freelance terrorism thing is such a 90s trope.
Yeah.
Like if you go back to the 90s, when we think of terrorism in the 90s, most people don't think of, ISIS or Osama bin Laden. That's after 9/11. I think of like the Oklahoma City bombing or the World Trade Center was, Al-Qaeda, but that one wasn't nearly as big a deal. Oklahoma City was the big
one.
terrorism event of the 90s.
Yeah, it was all a little more homegrown terrorism and less
homegrown domestic terrorism.
And a lot of the
more of what you're seeing now.
Yeah, and a lot of the 90s action movies sort of reflected that too. Like you think of The Rock, like those guys are not they're not terrorists from the Middle East. The only one big movie from the 90s that I can think of, mid to late 90s, because as we started getting into the aughts, there were more Middle Eastern terrorists.
Yeah, you had like The Siege was like 2000 or
99, 98, something like that. But it's True Lies. That's sort of the big one that I think of that has like Middle Eastern
there were
terrorists.
A couple. There was True Lies and Executive Decision.
Yes,
with
Executive Decision.
Which is Die Hard on an airplane.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Air Force One was Die Hard on Air Force
On
One.
Air Force One,
And
yeah.
he's the president. Those weren't, those were, like, breakaway Russian Republic terrorists.
Right,
Those
yeah,
were, like, former Soviet guys.
It was still, that was sort of hangers-on from the Cold War.
Yeah, they were still salty about the Cold War being over. And so they were going to create, chaos in Eastern European countries. Again, we're back.
We're right there.
We've come back around. But yeah, there was there was Blown Away with
that was
Jeff Bridges and Tommy Lee Jones.
Yeah.
There was Speed, of course, and Speed 2, and those two were guys with grudges, that once owed them. The Brosnan movies were all about that stuff.
Yeah.
And then there was Arlington Road,
Right,
which
that's
is
right.
a great movie. I like underrated. Like, what if your next door neighbors suddenly you realize they're Timothy McVeigh?
Right.
You know.
Yeah, that's a really good movie. I haven't seen that in a long time.
Yeah,
But I remember
and
really liking
and that's
that.
less of an action
That's just a
schlock.
thriller,
That's more
yeah.
of a thriller.
Yeah.
But it's great. So Jeff Bridges and Tim Robbins and Joan Cusack are all in that. It's
That's
a great
right.
cast.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is the terrorism for hire.
Yeah.
I think of that as such a 90s villain trope.
Yeah, well, and also, I mean, there had been sort of homegrown terrorism or terrorists that had, been from America, but we hadn't been directly attacked by terrorists yet.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
and
Because after 9/11, well, there was a period where you just couldn't make movies like this.
No.
And joke about it, or it wasn't funny. And then there was a period where you could do serious movies about terrorism, and even the most I'd say The Dark Knight might be the first time it felt like a post 9/11 action superhero comic book movie.
Right.
And even Dark Knight's pretty damn serious compared to most.
And Iron Man sort of makes vague allusions to this a little bit in the War on Terror and stuff like that.
The
first Iron Man.
and then when they rebooted Bond,
Right.
Casino Royale, and
Yeah.
he's the banker for the
Yeah,
terrorists.
but all of them became a lot more serious
Yeah.
too, and a little. I mean, aside from Iron Man, which was lot more jokier, but they all became this is a serious subject. We can't make fun of it. We can't make light of it. But I mean, it's sort of true, but it also it's just funny looking at it as American exceptionalism. We hadn't been attacked yet. We can kind of make jokes about this. I mean,
Yeah.
this is why James Cameron says he doesn't want to do a True Lies sequel. Because after 9/11, you can't make jokes
It
about
wouldn't be fun. It's why
Yeah.
it's why John McClane stopped being fun.
Right.
This is this movie's a mess, but it's still fun. And I think those kind of heroes, they still sometimes exist, but they're never fun. Olympus Has Fallen is not fun. White House Down thinks it's fun, but it's not fun.
No.
James Bond isn't even all that fun anymore.
Yeah.
It's this kind of action movie has changed, and this version of it is so 90s. I think of this is like the Michael Bay era too, or
Right,
the Jerry
yeah.
Bruckheimer Michael
Yeah,
Bay era. So
yeah.
you had The Rock, you had Armageddon. The opening of Armageddon when the asteroids hit New York, it's it's probably a robbery, arson, terrorist bomb. It's Mr. Cooper from Hanging with Mr. Cooper as the cab driver. It's because after 9/11, no one would have ever been I think there's terrorists attacking a building. Welcome to New York. It became a completely different thing.
Just it's sort of I guess it hadn't sort of occurred to me just how less fun action movies sort of got as after that.
And then they became everything became visual effects showcases. That's why action movies now are superhero movies. That's the thing. Whereas the 90s, I don't think there was a definitive type of action movie. There was kind of everything. The 90s are such a hodgepodge of genres.
Yeah, I mean, there was kind of everything, but I do there is sort of a through line. I mean, a lot of them starred Nicolas Cage. I mean, you sort of look at The Rock, Con Air, Face Off. A lot of those... Face Off is another one with a homegrown terrorist, too.
Yes, and Con Air is Die Hard
And
on a plane full of convicts.
Exactly. And it's those kind of movies where it's a little... They're the action scenes are really big and very almost excessive. And
the characters are also always very big. The heroes stopped being larger than life because there's only a finite number of people in the world that look like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Right, yeah.
But the villains never stop being
right.
big.
I mean, you've got... And, The Rock does its level best to ground some of those guys. But, Ed Harris is very, serious. But, everyone around him is just cartoons.
Yeah, Ed Harris feels like a villain you'd have in a movie now.
Right, exactly.
But he's surrounded. He's got like Tony Todd and John C. McGinley, all these like
and that
completely...
one swirly guy who was in every '90s action movie.
I just remembered his name. It's Gregory Sporletter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
He had like a... He was like if Michael Shannon and Jeremy Davies had a baby, it'd be Gregory Sporletter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got those guys, and then So you have that, and then of course in Con Air, every character actor in the world is in that movie, and just acting their tits off.
Yeah, and then you had Lethal Weapon 4 was in there, and Lethal Weapon 4. I think when we talk about Lethal Weapon 3, we'll talk about just how racist Lethal Weapon 4 is about Asian people. But the opening of Lethal Weapon 4 is them basically fighting a supervillain.
Right.
Because he's that guy with like the flamethrower and the machine
jetpack,
gun.
right, or something?
No,
he
has like a
flamethrower,
flamethrower, and I think they shoot the gas tanks on his back.
Oh, that's
and
it.
he goes flying into like a tanker truck. Trailer for Lethal Weapon 4 was just the first like 3 minutes of the movie.
Right. So, and then you also have a little bit of the influence of the Hong Kong New Wave too, with John Woo coming over and doing movies over here too. So it's a lot of like big action sequences that are like widescreen action scenes,
Yeah, and that sort of changed who the action heroes were.
Right.
Like this is like John McClane in this is kind of the last of the 80s action heroes.
Yeah.
And then the action heroes sort of like there was a changing of the guard in the late 90s when you had like Will Smith became an action star. Right. You had Jackie Chan, Jet Li, Angelina Jolie, like Tomb Raider,
and Nicolas Cage,
and Nicolas Cage still like Nicolas Cage. Yeah, because Nicolas Cage became an action guy
right around this time,
kind of the same way Liam Neeson suddenly became an action guy. Nicolas Cage in the early 90s is still doing like comedies and
heavy
dramas. Like he won an Oscar in 95, I think, 94, 95.
Yeah, and then he does The Rock in 96, I think, or that's when it's released, and then he's just action guy for the rest of the 90s. And
in The Rock, he's not the action
hero.
He's
just sort of a nerdy...
He's the nerd.
Sean Connery's really the action hero in that. But, I mean, and I think that's what makes that movie work. Yeah. It's those two.
Well, it's like Die Hard with a Vengeance, and it's like the Lethal Weapon movies in that the best of these movies give the action guy someone to play off of who isn't inherently annoying.
Right.
Like, like Fifth Element, Chris Tucker's really over the top, but he's not the sidekick in that.
Right.
It's Bruce Willis is playing off of Mila Jovovich and Ian Holm for most of that. In this, he's playing off of Samuel L. Jackson. In the original Die Hard, he talks to Alan Rickman and Al, Alan and Al, a lot in that movie. It's like, and I think that's the difference that made John McClane become such a trendsetter as a character, is that he is so, like we talked about at the beginning, he's a much more emotionally dynamic character, whereas Rambo and the Terminator they're very stoic. They're very solo. They don't have banter.
Right. And I mean, and until you sort of use the Terminator as like a Spock type character in Terminator 2, where you can play the joke as he doesn't have emotions or he's trying to learn.
And then when they tried that with someone like Stallone, it doesn't always work. Like Tango and Cash,
right?
Yeah,
I mean, and Stallone is always better when he's either, I don't know. It's so weird when he's in sort of big action movies and he's like trying to be funny. He doesn't do it that well.
Yeah, because it's like Stallone and Schwarzenegger, if you use them in the right context, they are very effective. Like Stallone gives amazing performances in like the Rocky movies, so good in Creed.
Yeah.
And
I'd say the first two Rambos.
Yeah, First Blood isn't even an action movie. It's like a survival thriller,
But I mean, I think he's good in First Blood part. Well, when we get to Rambo 3, we'll talk about that. But
do we get to win this time?
I think he's fun in Rambo Part 2, but he's not like Schwarzenegger can deliver a joke.
Yeah,
Stallone really can't. At
least it's such a rare gift, because I would make the argument that Dwayne Johnson is a much better actor than Stallone or Arnold Schwarzenegger, but his when he tries to do action comedy, I don't think it's nearly as effective.
Yeah, it feels like he's trying too hard.
Yeah. And the same with like Vin Diesel or someone like that. That's why they have like these big ensembles.
Right.
You leave all the comedy to Tyrese, and
yeah, and Ludacris. Yeah.
Yeah. It's yeah, and I think that's what makes Bruce Willis so special as an action movie icon, is that he was probably the best act. He's the best actor out of everyone that ended up in the Expendables.
Right.
And he was still convincing as an action star. But when he transitioned to just dramas or thrillers or comedies,
Even straight comedies,
it was seamless. Moonlighting was a great show. It was hugely popular, and part of that was he was really funny on it. Yeah. Before this, he'd also done he was the talking baby. He was the original Boss Baby.
Right, that's right. He was in
Look Who's Talking.
Look Who's Talking. Yeah, I mean, I think he's a really great actor. I mean, and I guess we should talk about him a little bit right now.
Well, recently he's sort of had suddenly fallen into this realm of very cheap, by the numbers action movies where it seemed like he was just showing up for a small part and phoning it in. But as we now know, he's suffering from aphasia. Yeah. And he's basically retired from acting, and it's very sad. He's it's sad that people gave we all joked about it for so long, and it's a shame that he's suffering, because I can name a dozen movies that he's in that I love. And he's so good, and anyone else as John McClane, I don't know if the movie would have worked quite so well.
No, I think that's true, and I think it goes to that thing, he can play depression. I think he can play depression really well.
Yeah.
And that because John McClane, when you first meet him in that first Die Hard, he is depressed. I mean, he's not he's not having a good time, but he's but you see it in his soul in a way that a lot of actors play sad, but it's different. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's the difference between John McClane in the last two movies, where he's just Bruce Willis,
right?
And he doesn't give a shit about anything.
Yeah.
And the first three, where this is a good guy that keeps who's been kind of just beaten down.
Yeah.
And he's like a Marvel hero. He's kind of his own worst enemy a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, I feel like we haven't really talked about Die Hard with a Vengeance much, because the plot is so all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, and there's not a whole lot to talk about. I mean, it's McTiernan's directing. I guess, McTiernan came back to the franchise he started.
I think his star had fallen a little bit, because Last Action Hero was an infamous flop.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the direction's pretty good up until it starts. The set pieces just start becoming ludicrously big.
And they obviously they reshot the ending. That whole sequence in Quebec, the boat stuff's been cut up and reshot, and then they reshot the ending in Quebec. Originally, the ending was they get away with the gold. We don't know that they stole it. And then John McClane tracks Simon down in Europe, I'm assuming. And he's I lost, I got fired from the force, but I figured it out. He makes him play chicken with a rocket launcher. He asks him riddles. It's you can find this scene online. It's very dark for a Die Hard ending, and it doesn't feel like Die Hard at all.
Right. Or the movie that preceded it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But I mean, Jeremy Irons is fun. He's hamming it up, and I don't know, but what's there to say? There's not a lot of meat on this bone, aside from the dynamic between Samuel L. Jackson and Bruce Willis, and they're running around, they're solving puzzles. And
I think if it had just been Simon Says, it would be oh, that's a fun thriller from the 90s.
Right.
I think the fact that it has the Die Hard brand on it, we're going to hold it to the standard of the original Die Hard.
Right.
And I think it's a better made movie than Die Hard 2, but it definitely doesn't. I don't think of it. I don't watch and think, oh, I'm watching a Die Hard movie.
No.
Apart from maybe that John McClane is there.
Yeah, I mean, and that's sort of the problem with spinning a franchise out of something that doesn't need to be franchised. It's
which leads to another point, is this is back when franchises weren't planned out for 10 films in advance.
Right. It was just sort of, well, let's see if the next one makes enough money, and then we'll make another one.
Yeah.
If it does.
Because there's not a lot of continuity between the 5 Die Hards. This is the third movie, one where the past comes back to haunt you.
Right.
Because it's revenge for Hans Gruber's death.
Right. I mean, and that's the thing. There's so many of these part 3s we've already hit upon. It does the same thing. It's we're bringing back the old hits. We're bringing back, Hans Gruber, but not really. And
well, it's also part 3 a lot when you don't have your franchise locked in for 7 Fantastic Beasts movies. Right. If you've made it to 3, you don't know how much farther you're going to go. So if you want to tie it back around, now's the time.
That's when you do it. Yeah.
Because trilogies were a thing in 1995, but rare franchise that kept going for 4 movies.
Right. I mean, and yeah, outside of, I mean...
There hadn't been a 4th Lethal Weapon.
No,
there hadn't been a 4th Rambo yet.
Right.
Rocky had done 5. You had James Bond. Planet of the Apes was long since over.
Yeah.
Star Wars was back
pretty
yet.
moribund at that point. Yeah.
Star Wars wasn't cool at one point.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, the big trilogies were the Star Wars trilogy and the Godfather trilogy.
Right.
And both of those, like, Godfather 3 at this point was the punchline of terrible sequels.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so I mean, and it makes sense that they sort of either go back to the well, and it becomes like a Bond movie. And when we do talk about Lethal Weapon 3, that movie has the same problems too.
Yeah. That movie, the problem is it's not that they went in with a script that was written for another movie, it's that they went in with no script at all.
Right. But it has the same sort of like, well, we're just kind of chugging along until we get to the next set piece. So,
yeah, it's so weird because it does feel like everything that we knew about John McClane has been shoved off screen. His wife, his family, his friends in LA. He's back in New York where we've never seen him before.
Yeah, but and it's weird that the movie acts like we should know all of like his ensemble guys, like his chief and everything. It's very strange in the way that they're set up. It's like, should we know this? Did I miss something?
Yeah, and I like that he has an instant rapport with them, and they're not all, like, his boss and his buddies aren't, like, he's not just constantly in friction with them.
Yeah.
They like him. They're all well written. Like, it would be it's so rare to see all those characters be written in, like, a thoughtful, competent way.
Right.
And you root for them. You're just, at some point, you sort of, like when you're watching this movie with a critical eye, you're like, wait a minute, why am I rooting for these guys? Isn't this a Die Hard movie?
Yeah, it's...
shouldn't I be rooting for, John McClane?
And, yeah.
Like, what if the plot had, instead of getting bigger and bigger, had gotten smaller and smaller, and ultimately it's the terrorists end up taking over a school for the 3rd act?
Yeah.
Or... Instead of, that's the thing, is like, you're supposed to know about all these, feel like you know these characters and know their relationship with John McClane, and if you're watching Die Hard 1, Die Hard 2 ends with him reuniting with Holly, and everyone's happy, everything's good, it's Christmas again.
Right.
And then when you see him in this one, he's like, oh, what happened?
Exactly.
Like, what if this one started with his life's fine? He's living in New York with Holly now, and he's got his kids, and it's his kids in the school.
Right.
And he's sort of like, he's retired from the LAPD or from being a cop, and he gets pulled back in because the cops like show up, like, we need you, this guy is going to blow stuff up, but he's asking for you specifically.
Yeah.
Give it, that's the thing, it's like he starts out already looking like shit, and I think of John McClane as starting out looking okay, and by the end, when he's staggering in, covered in his own blood, and,
something's broken, and his arm's hanging limply.
Yeah.
Yeah.
His feet are all cut to shit.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that would, I mean, if you're going to do continuity, I think that would make sense. It's a strange choice. And I mean, again, as you said, it's a different script grafted onto a Die Hard movie, but it's a strange choice to start him in such a dark place and not at least end him in a happier place. I mean, he calls Holly at the end, so I guess there's something.
Well, he doesn't
he
actually
doesn't,
talk
that's
to her.
right, yeah.
He goes to call her, and you feel like that's the end of the movie.
Yeah.
Like the final shot of the movie should be him finally picking up the phone to talk to Holly, but no, we gotta go to Quebec.
Yeah.
Have like a shootout with a helicopter.
Right, exactly. That's right. He calls her and then doesn't. Because he has to run off to beat the bad guy. But it seems like you want him to go from like either a place of, I need to protect my family, I need to protect what I've built, because the first movie and the second movie are about bringing his family back together, knitting the family back together. Or if he's in this dark place, it needs to be, I need to get my family back together. There's no, the other two movies have that, a little bit of an arc for him. And here he's kind of like, yeah, I got to call my wife. And that's kind of where it ends up. And it
feels very tacked on. And that's the problem with this movie, is that they didn't blend it enough. Like, that's why I say, like, one more draft.
And at least, or for God's sake, make Holly a character. Put her in the movie. Like,
and then Die Hard 4 and 5, it's his kids.
Right.
But
I mean,
still,
and as much as I love Mary Elizabeth Winstead, I mean, I don't hate Die Hard 4, but there is a point, like with this movie, where I'm just sort of like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah, That one is also just like the appeal of Die Hard as a franchise goes beyond just this is a character named John McClane played by Bruce Willis.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
he has to do certain things and be in certain situations for everything to click. It's like he's like Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones isn't we're not going to have an action movie where Indiana Jones is like helping hostages at a supermarket.
Right.
You know, it's an archaeological dig, you know. It's and for him it's like John McClane shouldn't be like riding on the backs of jets and taking down global cyber terrorism. It's a little smaller. It's big and it's full of explosions and there's set pieces, but it's still all very contained.
Yeah.
Like we both have just seen Everything Everywhere All at Once with Michelle Yeoh, which is fantastic. And if you haven't seen it, go see it in theaters.
And the less you know about it, the better.
Exactly.
Like, just go see it.
And if you've seen the trailers, you know that this is like a sprawling multiverse movie, but it's still almost entirely centered on like 2 locations.
2 locations and like 3 characters.
And it's still incredibly grounded and you can really track what's going on. Bigger is fine for a movie, but you don't want to spread yourself too thin. And a lot of action movies, especially sequels, end up a mile wide and an inch deep.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and you know, and I mean, as we've talked about on the show so much, so many of these things just feel like everyone's out of gas and tired. This one doesn't feel...
No,
doesn't
I
have
don't
that
think... This is
feeling.
like, hey, we got... It feels a little more like Lethal Weapon 4, where it's like, we got the gang back
gang's-
together. Everyone's here.
everyone's
it's just
here.
The script isn't where it should be, so it's structurally really weird, and but there's a reason why people like this one the best of the sequels.
Well, and I mean, because it is, and like, you know, it kind of sounds like we're shitting on it, but it's fun. It is a lot of fun. Like, it's not a bad movie.
I've
by
watched
any
this
means.
movie many, many, many times.
And
It was always on TV.
Yeah.
I definitely had it on DVD for a while. It's a great, fun watch. I had a good time watching it here.
Yeah.
It's not a RoboCop 3.
No.
And it's not a Dark Knight Rises. This is a fun sequel.
Yeah, it's absolutely like I mean, if you're watching the Die Hard movies, it's absolutely worth your time.
And the simple fact is, like 99% of all big action blockbusters, you just don't want to think about it too hard.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
what makes Die Hard the original work so well is that if you think about it, it's still pretty damn good.
Right. It's that's such a solid script that it, even when you start like poking holes at it, you're like, it still works. And more importantly, the emotional stuff works, which is, for me, that's what really matters to me. So the emotional stuff on the original Die Hard is just so solid.
Yeah, he has this wonderful arc about sort of him figuring out what he's got to do to make it right with his wife.
Yeah.
And not like, it is a character that is like, he starts out being all like prideful and defensive about her not keeping his last name, and he's just humbled in so many different ways as the story goes on.
Yeah. He realizes what's important to him, and really keeping his family together is the most important thing, and that's what makes him a hero at the end of the day.
And Al, on the flip side, learns that he likes guns and he's ready to kill.
And he's ready to kill again. Yeah. Yeah, okay, so that's a very problematic aspect of the original Die Hard. Now, not necessarily at the time.
Oh, that he shot the kid.
He shot the kid.
Yeah. Well, they don't show it, and they don't play it for comedy.
Yeah.
You get the sense that he feels bad about it. He's like, I'm not, I gave up being a street cop. I'm, trying, Al's a good guy.
Yeah.
And they don't lean into the racial aspect
That's
of it
true,
like
they
you get
don't.
with this movie, which was a thorny issue in 1995 New York. It's a thornier issue now.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it really helps that Samuel L. Jackson is the one doing it. I can't think of who you would get in 1995 who could fill that part.
The only other person that could play that kind of part in 1995 was Danny Glover.
Right,
he was
and he was
for.
busy.
Yeah. No, it would have been a Chris Tucker,
right,
or a 90s Dave Chappelle. It would have been a different type of. It would have been a full-on sidekick, not a partner.
Right, and at this point, Will Smith was too close to being a movie star to put him in the second banana role.
Yeah, we were just on the cusp of it would have been Will Smith was about to become a movie star, Jamie Foxx was about to become a movie star, Denzel was a big star, but he was leading movies at this point.
Yeah, I mean, this was it was it this summer of Independence Day, or was it the no?
That was
it
the following
It was the
summer.
following summer. So
95 was this and Batman Forever.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And then 96 was Independence Day, and then 97 was
Men in Black.
Men in Black and the Star Wars Special Edition.
Right. Right. Yeah, I was just thinking of Will Smith's.
Will Smith, yeah.
Career
It's
trajectory,
it's Independence Day. Well, Bad Boys was
Bad
95.
Boys 95.
Independence Day, Men in Black, and then I think he's doing like Enemy of the State after that.
Right. I mean, by after Independence Day, he's a movie star.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just,
Easily. So yeah, I think we've rambled and we dissected a little bit, but it's a fun movie. It's as for a franchise that honestly, it's not beloved as a series. It's just beloved as one movie. This is the best of the sequels. It's very watchable. Yeah. It's fun. It's got some, like, the first like a half has some great set pieces. The fight in the elevator.
It's really
great.
It's
really good.
Yeah.
It predates Winter Soldier.
Yeah. No, the fight in the elevator is great. I mean, like, and a lot of the stuff when they're running around the city and trying to find the bombs, like, there's a lot of really good tension there.
Yeah,
too.
There's some good, like, vehicular action, like when they're driving through Central Park and stuff. Yeah, I never felt sad or bad watching it.
Nope. It was a really fun watch, and
yeah. There it is.
There it is.
And speaking of sad or bad,
it's my pick.
It's Will's pick.
So I'm going to do kind of a weird one, Sam, and maybe this is podcast breaking. I don't know. But so this is a spiritual sequel, not an actual sequel. So
okay.
I'm going to pick Edgar Wright's The World's End.
Oh, all right. The third in the Three Flavors Cornetto trilogy.
Exactly. So not a trilogy per se, but spiritually.
The third in a director's auteur trilogy,
right.
if you will.
Yeah, with the same creative partners across all three. Because, Edgar Wright's other movies were not co-written by Simon Pegg. So
right. Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, The World's End.
That's right.
Which I recall not liking.
The World's End, well, we'll talk about it.
So if I'm being perfectly candid. Not that I'm not saying you picked a bad movie.
No.
I just remember going into it wanting Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz, and it's kind of a different movie.
It is different, and it's a different emotional register than the other two.
Yeah.
So it'll be fun to unpack.
Yeah.
I think.
Great cast.
Yeah. Really good cast. So.
Yeah, that'll be fun. And then I think I know what mine's going to be after that, but I'll tell you next week. It's all I'll say is it coincides with the calendar nicely. And yeah, so any final thoughts on Die Hard with a Vengeance?
Well, Sam, who is the 21st president?
Hillary Clinton. No, she'd be the 43rd president. Hillary Clinton is president.
What a joke!
I mean, to be fair, it didn't happen.
It didn't happen.
Yeah.
No.
It's anyone that's watching the movie that knows the answer is Chester A. Arthur must be really frustrated.
I would imagine.
Just like
up until they meet that trucker guy.
This is a movie that really is like, if you watch this and you've only lived in a world of smartphones, this movie, there's so many plot points where if they had a smartphone,
it would just be over.
When they're like, oh, our detonators are sensitive to police frequencies. We got to run things through the switchboard. Nope, right. We all have cell phones now.
Yeah, we just text it.
Yeah. Solve this really hard math problem. Oh, I got a
calculator right in my pocket. Yeah.
To this day, how do they solve the water jug thing? I still haven't been able to figure it out.
Oh God, what's the riddle?
They've got a 5-gallon jug and a 3-gallon jug, and the bomb is deactivated by the weight of 4 gallons of water. Exactly.
Right.
Like, they cut away and then they cut back and they've got 2 gallons of water in one of the jugs.
Right. I guess that's... I don't know. I don't remember.
I'm sure it's on Reddit somewhere, but it's bugged me every time I watch it, and I have, like, chicken scratch in my notes of how to figure it out.
I also love the St. Ives poem, because there was a Sesame Street skit with it.
Oh, yes. That's right. It's a trick question.
Yeah. No one was going to St. Ives.
Do kids still play Simon Says?
I don't know.
It's a good question. When Evan gets old enough, tell him to get back to us.
Oh, yeah, I'll ask him.
All right.
Okay.
Well, until that day, I am Sam Charrington. Thank you for listening. You can find us on Elon Musk's Twitter at Podcast Part 3. And I think we're going to set up like an Instagram account too, so that people can see my very middling Photoshop of our episode logos. But until then, thank you all for listening. Hope you enjoy. Check us out next time for The World's End.
And rate, review, and subscribe.
Yes, all those things and more. Will, it's nice seeing you in person.
It is.
For once. And let's do
really
this
nice.
again sometime.
Yeah. All right.
Adios, everybody.